Hello everybody and welcome back to Typical City. There is absolutely no shortage of young Portuguese talent out there, clearly, because there is so many world-class, potentially world-class players working their way and climbing through the ranks of multiple Portuguese clubs, and City are in for another one. João Neves, the Benfica defensive midfielder, 19 years old, playing Champions League football, which is huge news. I think this is concrete. I really believe this is concrete rumours that are generating into something tangible, something real that City fans can sink their teeth into as a real possibility, and it excites me. Not the first time I've covered him on this channel, the third time, in fact, I think I've mentioned him on this channel, because we were linked with him in the summer. We were linked with him after the summer transfer window closed. It was only a month ago, I think I was talking about him. He's an incredible talent, something that really excites me, and those that will have remembered Enzo Fernandez, of course, came through the ranks of Benfica and ended up going for 120 million euros to Chelsea as well. That was the reported fee they paid for him, which he hasn't really torn up too many trees in the Premier League, but I think we can all agree that Enzo Fernandez is a class act. There is a quality player in there that hasn't quite hit the ground running at Chelsea as you'd probably have expected him to, in particular for that price tag, but there is no reason why he won't grow and become that, maybe never become the 120 million euro player, but there's no reason for him to not become an incredible Premier League defensive midfielder that we can all hang our hat on and say he's a very, very good player. I think João Neves is in the exact same boat. Where his ceiling is, we're yet to see it. The issue for City fans that we can all be drawn our attention to is that release clause fee of 103 million euros is the reported fee for the release clause, to trigger that release clause, at least for João Neves, and that's extortionate amount of money. I don't know many 19-year-olds out there that have those sort of figures associated with them. But what really is interesting is the agency that's involved. Gesto Fuerte, I could say that name all day long, Gesto Fuerte, which is Jorge Mendes' agency firm, which currently has on the client books of Edison, Bernardo Silva, Matias Nunes and Ruben Diaz, all under the Gesto Fuerte umbrella. And João Neves is another player that's under that same umbrella of players. So there is already some good business that's already happened with Jorge Mendes and Gesto Fuerte and Manchester City. There's a proven track record and a good business relationship there that hopefully we can hang our hat on again and think that there is some real concrete possibilities here that City could sign this player. Now, the issue that I think City fans will be immediately drawn to, like I've said already, is that £103 million release clause. But I don't think we need to panic and say that's the figure City have to pay. It certainly isn't going to happen in January. I think that needs to be nipped in the bud, that City aren't going to be approaching João Neves in January. Maybe we could test the waters in January and enter into discussions with Benfica potentially. But I think any sort of formal bids would likely be in summer of 2024. But the exciting thing is, or at least the attention is drawn to that release clause. I don't think City will have to pay anywhere near that. And there is recent proof of that with Gonçalo Ramos, who went from Benfica to PSG for 65 million euros. His release clause was 120 million. 120 million was his release clause. So clearly Benfica like to protect their assets, look after their players, their well-being, Benfica's well-being in particular, and making sure they don't get screwed on any potential deals or lose players on the cheap. And they want to avoid that. With that proven track record of Gonçalo Ramos going from Benfica to PSG for 65 million, but he had a 120 million euro release clause, that bodes well going forward for the idea that City don't have to pay the 103 million release clause for João Neves, which I think we could pay us something similar along those lines of 60, 70, maybe getting in towards 80 million pounds. But if you start paying 80, 90 million pounds for a 19-year-old, that's a huge, huge amount of pressure. But Bernardo Silva's been pulling strings recently, because the only major club that's been linked, I say major, are they major anymore? But Man United are the other club that have been linked with João Neves. They can get in line, know your place. Know your place, get behind us. Manchester City have entered the race, which knocks Manchester United down the pecking order. Something that just, something wonderful about that, isn't there? There is just something wonderful and calmer about the idea that United have always wanted these players, and they used to always get what they wanted, didn't they? Now they enter a race like, oh, we really want that João Neves, and the City open the door and say, we're in for him as well, and they have to leave. exit stage right or stage left, whichever the phrase is. I mean, United need to get in line in this situation because City are going in for this player now, and that obviously knocks United down the pecking order. But Bernardo Silva has been pulling strings as well. Recently asked during the international break how he sees his future, and he speaks incredibly highly of João Neves. But to cut a long story short, when asked on the potential prospect of him joining Manchester City, Bernardo Silva is being quoted as saying, "For City instead of United, if I can, I will pull strings to João Neves to go to Man City. I'd like to see João joining City instead of Man United, of course he would." And I think there's a realistic possibility for this to happen. Now, I think what a lot of people are immediately looking at is, first of all, we've been linked with Lucas Paquetá. This will be an as well as, not an instead of. I think this will be an as well as, and there's going to be an array of midfielders that we look at. The likeliness is Calvin Phillips is going to go out on loan, leaving Manchester City probably in January, which could leave us a little bit short. There could be the odd game, 1 or 2 games in the latter parts of this season, that we need a defensive midfielder in that particular role, and Calvin Phillips could play half an hour here, half an hour there, and just get us over the line in certain games, which is a risk that City seem to be willing to take to let him go in January, just for those little moments, those little half an hour here, half an hour there moments that we might need Calvin Phillips going forward. The idea of it sounds more likely that it could be a loan with an option to buy for Calvin Phillips to leave, but then the immediate attention is drawn to, well, if Phillips is out, we already were short on cover for Rodri. Now, Paquetá doesn't really fit the bill as a cover for Rodri. I'm sure he could play that role. I think Pep's got other ideas for Lucas Paquetá. People have said he's De Bruyne's replacement, which I think isn't true at all. Far from it. He's not Rodri and he's not De Bruyne. He's not there. I actually think he's somewhere in between. I think Lucas Paquetá is somewhere in between those two types of players, and I think he's got more versatility. João Neves has played right down the spine of Benfica this season. He's played in defensive midfield, central midfield, and even attacking midfield, which is a great news from a versatility point of view, and Manchester City can be excited about the fact that we have another player that can fill the holes of many different positions going forward in a starting 11 for Manchester City. That's exciting. That's really, really exciting. I do think he's predominantly got his future set as a defensive midfielder, though. And I was recently asked about the idea of replacing Calvin Phillips and Rodri as well, and how he can sit underneath Rodri. The best thing to do is go and get a kid. Go and get a 19-year-old, albeit a very expensive kid, a kid with incredible prospects and a ceiling that we haven't seen yet, a really bright future for João Neves. But the idea of signing him so young would be a real coup for Manchester City, because I think that is another indication that City could look at him and, without being disrespectful to him, he would know his place at Manchester City. He would understand that Rodri is the pedestal. He's the golden god of Manchester City defensive midfield position. He's the one right now. And the fact that he's 19, he would understand that. He would come in and recognise that, yeah, I'm going to apply my trade and hopefully get more minutes. Maybe playing alongside Rodri numerous times and doing that John Stones type of role that we've seen. Maybe not tucking back into centre-back, not that, but we could play a double pivot without any sort of hybrid role of going into fullback or going into centre-back. We could see that from João Neves and playing, but predominantly would be the understudy to Rodri, which at that age, I think you understand. You get given an opportunity to learn your trade and ply your trade playing football with Pep Guardiola teaching you a few tricks, tips and tricks under Pep Guardiola. You got to snap your hand off. You know, I think most players at 19 playing as a defensive midfielder would give anything, give their right arm to play under Pep Guardiola. And that idea is something City could utilise with him being so young. And I always wondered why Calvin Phillips joined Manchester City, because I think that was an odd decision. Something may have been promised to him that we're not privy to, but the idea that Calvin Phillips coming in, he was entering the peak of his career, Calvin Phillips, to the point where it's like, surely he doesn't see himself as Rodri's understudy. Surely Calvin Phillips joined and looked at that situation and thought, I should be challenging Rodri. I should be going toe-to-toe for Rodri, and seeing it didn't pan out that way. Rodri went woof, and Calvin Phillips sort of declined, if anything, didn't he? And their careers took very opposing trajectory paths, sadly. João Neves is in a different position, though, because of his age, because he's so young at 19 years of age. He's clearly going to want to learn a little bit more and understand that might not be my time to be an absolute main staple in Manchester City's midfield, but slowly bed him in. And you've got that reason to do it with his age, and being so young, you can persuade him a little bit easier to be Rodri's understudy. And in 2 or 3 years, when he reaches 22, 23 years old, Rodri will be approaching 30 at that point. Maybe injuries creep into Rodri's game with the age factor of both players coming into play. And all of a sudden, you've got a little smooth transition of Rodri being phased out in a matter of years away, what I'm talking about, and João Neves being phased in. I like where this is going. And you need to go and look at the player if you haven't already, because he's absolutely tenacious. I'm going to pop his stats up on the board quickly for you, just to give you an idea. Very little to go off when you talk about defensive midfielders, because you need to see years of them playing football to really get an understanding. And there aren't enough stats out there to highlight what a player can and can't do in defensive midfield, you know, because they're not in the game for your goals and assists. That's not their job. They're not really in the game for getting clearances, and defensive statistics aren't really there to shine a light on what a defensive midfielder can do. You're looking at ball retention. In particular at Manchester City, you're looking at ball retention, but here are his basic stats that I can give you from this season. 18 appearances, 1,365 minutes, a goal and an assist, 3 big chances created so far, and 91% passing accuracy is really good. So there's his stats and indication of ball retention, but I highly recommend going and checking out this player if you haven't seen him already. He's a bulldog. I love what he's all about, and he tucks his shirt in as well. Have a look at that. He tucks his shirt in. He's all business. He is all business. Kind of reminds me of a certain defensive midfielder that we already have. Who's that then? Defensive midfielder that tucks his shirt in. I wouldn't be surprised to find out if João Neves has a business degree, or is at least working on obtaining a business degree, and he doesn't have any tattoos, and he donates blood, and he gives a lot to charity. Sounds like a certain City player already, you know. So I'm talking about that transition of Rodri out eventually in the very, very distant horizon future, João Neves coming in. It's exciting. I believe this to be a real concrete rumour. There's plenty of publications out there that are reporting on this. Hopefully we can beat United to the post in signing João Neves, probably in 2024. But Blues, get your comments in below. What do you think of João Neves? Give your comments in the comment sections below. I really want to hear them. Drop a like and please subscribe if you're new to the channel. Typical City it is, and I'll see you on the next one.
This is Typical City now.